we have the three core elements of an authoritarian rule. The first is a rubber-stamped Congress. The second, a Supreme Court which proceeds to hand more power to the executive. And the third is an aggressive authoritarian personality as president. Those are the three components. They are all present here right now. You know, I was struck by a ruling called Trump versus the United States of America. This ruling stemmed from President Trump's first term, but it was decided during the Biden administration. And the Supreme Court was being given a case in which the question is the President of the United States above the law? Can the President commit a crime but cloak it as a government action and be immune from prosecution? And when I heard that, I said, well, hell no. This is the United States of America. Hell no. You can't do that here. We have, above the Supreme Court, those four words, equal justice under law, no exceptions. And you could pull out your copy of the Constitution, We the People, and you page through it, and you find Article 2. Well, Article 2 is about the executive branch. And you start looking, is there anything in Article 2, anything at all, that says the president is above the law? Nothing. Nothing here says that. And think about our founders who were so concerned about the possibility of a president trying to be a king, so concerned about a president trying to use military forces against their own people. And so they didn't even want a standing army. And they created these carefully balanced checks and balances so that a president could not be an authoritarian. But suddenly the Supreme Court says, Article 2 starts out, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States, shall hold office during a term of 4 years, and so on and so forth. If you can find anything in here that says the president above the law, well then please bring it to my attention, because this article, it's really not that long. You got section 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's it. Section 1, 2, 3, 4. Where does this say the president is above the law? So I said, you know, there is no way that our Supreme Court will place an enormous power to break the law like a crown on the head of the president, because we don't have kings, we have presidents. No way the court will do that. A bunch of the Supreme Court justices, they like to say they're originalists. What does that mean? They're originalists. It means they try to take the clauses of the Constitution as they were understood at the time. Well, I can assure you there is no member of the founders of our nation who thought the president was above the law. And if some of them wanted it to be the case that the president is above the law, they might have argued to put it in the Constitution, but it's not here. Because collectively, they knew they would end up in an authoritarian state if the president's above the law. That's the Supreme Court handing more power to the executive, power that doesn't exist in the Constitution. So we have all three factors now. That's why I'm ringing the alarm bells tonight. We have a rubber-stamped Congress that is saying we will lead the chambers of the Congress to do what the president wants, as opposed to what the people of the United States want. We have the Supreme Court handing over vast power that doesn't exist in this document that guides us, this document they're supposed to defend, handing over this vast power to the President of the United States of America. And we have a president so willing, so determined to actually exercise the powers of a king, the authoritarian powers. We're in deep trouble. We're in deep trouble. That is why so many citizens across the country are in deep distress. That's why on Saturday, 7 million Americans took to the street on No King's Day to say this authoritarian takeover is absolutely outrageous, illegal, unconstitutional, unacceptable, and it must end. 7 million people, the largest demonstration in the history of our nation of people on the street on a one-day protest saying, pay attention, members of the House of Representatives. Pay attention, members of the Senate. Our Constitution is being shredded by the President, and you're helping. So stop. And instead, exercise your responsibility in a republic. Defend the separation of powers. Defend the checks and balances. Set the vision for the nation as a Congress, and remind the President that it is his job to implement that vision, not the other way around. The authoritarian takeover is not down the street. It is not around the corner. We are in the middle of it right now. And that's why 7 million Americans in some 2,700 individual protests took the streets on Saturday to send us a message. But I'm not sure that message was heard by the members of this chamber. So I'm here in this chamber tonight to ring the alarm bells and say to my colleagues, both sides of the aisle, the authoritarian takeover is here, it's a violation of our Constitution, and we have to stop it. The experts tell us that there are two ways when there is an authoritarian takeover, when the president becomes a self-appointed king, when a Congress becomes a rubber stamp, when a Supreme Court ignores the Constitution and hands more power to the president. Two ways to keep that authoritarian strongman state from becoming entrenched. The first is for there to be a visible and loud outcry in the first year. The reason that that's important is if there's no outcry, people go, well, this sounds outrageous to me, what just happened. I can't believe the president is trying to tell the networks what shows they can put up. That happens in authoritarian places, but I don't hear any outcries, so is it, maybe, do I misunderstand? Is it that unusual? Oh, the president is suing his own government and asking his Justice Department to find a settlement that will enrich the president. Oh, that seems outrageous. The president is asking his own Justice Department to give the president money? That seems outrageous, but if there's no outcry, maybe it's not that big a deal. Oh, the Secretary of State is throwing students out of this country because of views they expressed on a college campus. That seems extraordinary. Has that ever happened again? Well, nobody's protesting. Maybe I'm wrong to think that we have freedom of speech on our campuses. Oh, the president is weaponizing the Department of Justice to go after people he doesn't like, including proposing the possibility of going after a member of the U.S. Senate. I'm sure that 100 senators would stand up and say, hell no, to such an authoritarian act. What am I missing? If there's no outcry, if there's no protest, then you're in deep trouble. But here in the United States of America, I'm so pleased to say there is an understanding that our freedoms are being crushed. And that's why 7 million people took to the streets on Saturday. I was in Eastern Oregon, and I went to the small town of Lapine. Protests are not a common thing in Lapine, Oregon. It's rural, it's red, but there were 200 people out on the street with all sorts of creative signs and creative costumes. I was really struck by a couple of the veterans I spoke to who said, I fought for my country, and I volunteered and went because I believe in freedom, and our president is crushing those freedoms. And I'm out here to protest and to say what I fought for must not be undone by a president of the United States. Somebody who went and served. That was powerful. I was not drafted in Vietnam. I was too young by a year or two. And I did not volunteer to go. But those who went and come back home and say, our fathers and mothers were engaged in war to defend our freedoms, and I went with this conviction that I wanted to serve my country and defend that special America where we cherish our freedoms and defend our Constitution. I will not see it undone, by a President of the United States of America, a rubber-stamped Congress, and a court that has decided to find things that don't exist in the Constitution to give power to the executive, that the executive cannot rightfully claim. So that's the first thing that you need in order to keep authoritarian power from becoming entrenched. You need outrage the first year. You need protest the first year. You need protest inside the chamber. You need protest outside the chamber. So people will hear, who are maybe one step away from protesting, they think something's wrong, and they'll go, wow, I didn't go protest, but those 7 million people, they're sending me a message. And that message is, we're in a terrible place in our nation, and we need to be acting. Americans are standing up because the president is not a king. Americans are standing up because laws are not suggestions. Americans are standing up because following the Constitution is not optional. The second way to prevent the entrenchment of authoritarian power is the next election. The scholars really emphasize that because one of the standard things that an authoritarian ruler does is seek to rig the elections so that you won't have the integrity that allows them to be dislodged down the line, or to allow the strongman state to be dislodged by an outcry and vote of the people. You want to rig the next election. Well, that's why the next election matters, because there hasn't been as much time to rig it. The next election for us is November 2026. It's 13 months away. Well, that's still 13 months in which an authoritarian president can work to rig the election, but it's not 3 years out, because in 3 years, an authoritarian president can do a lot more rigging than they can in 13 months. So that next election matters enormously. You get that one chance to win. Don't mess it up. Because with each election, it will get harder and harder to displace the authoritarian structures that are created and strengthened by the strong man in the executive. And when you read by experts saying that this is the authoritarian playbook, watch, they say, for what that authoritarian president is doing, and what you will see is they will work to rig the elections. Okay, well, are we seeing that now? Well, yes, we are. His first tactic, Trump's first tactic to consolidate authoritarian control is to consolidate the state's voter registration files. If you have control over those files, it makes it easier to manipulate them in the next election. Now, we've already seen what some individual states have done to manipulate the voter files, and they've gone on